Welcome, everyone. As you're joining, we will get started momentarily. Welcome, everyone. We will get started in the next minute. Just giving people a chance to log in. All right, we are going to get started. I always like to make sure we get started on time. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to learn more about the first phase of our Perfecting the Recycling System for Flexible Plastic Packaging, or our PRFLEX study. PRFLEX is a collaboration of plastic circularity leaders across Canada, including the Canada Plastics Pact, the Circular Plastics Taskforce, Circular Materials, the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada, Recycle BC, and the Film and Flexibles Recycling Coalition, the Recycling Partnership, all of which have a goal of optimizing the recycling system for flexible plastic packaging. I'm Cher Meerweather. I'll be your host today. I'm the Managing Director of the Canada Plastics Pact, a solution space of the natural step in partnership with the Smart Prosperity Institute, whose shared vision is a strong and inclusive economy that thrives within nature's limits. If we go to the next slide, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you today from Milton, Ontario, Canada, which is on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee people. And we do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures in Canada. If we go to the next slide, in September of this year, the CPP published its 5-year roadmap to advance a circular economy for flexible plastic packaging in Canada. And this is a shared action plan that addresses the complex challenges of flexibles and outlines what's required to create real progress in accelerating solutions. PRFLEX plays an important role in advancing 3 key priorities within the roadmap. The first is to improve our upstream innovation and design for circularity. The second is improving collection and consumer education. The third is improving sorting, recycling, and end market development. And to that end, the first PRFLEX study includes a detailed assessment of the collection and recycling rates for flexible plastic packaging in each province, as well as a gap analysis of the infrastructure and technologies in material recovery facilities, or MRFs, and at recyclers. What I'd like to do now is introduce our experts and our moderator. Our moderator is Charles David Matthew Poulin, who's a strategic advisor for the Circular Plastics Taskforce. In terms of our expert panel, we have Sam Baker, who's the VP of Operations for Western Canada at Recycle BC. We have Pierre Benebides, who's the General Manager for the Circular Plastics Taskforce. We have Sarah Emmanuelle Dubois, who's the President of Nova Axia. And we have Paul Shorthouse, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Canada Plastics Pact. For our objectives today, we have 4 of them. We want to make sure that we can showcase our research findings and information. We want to make sure that we engage our subject matter experts to provide insights into the key learnings from this study. We want to provide our audience, you, with an opportunity to ask questions of our expert. And we want to highlight the next steps and recommendations from this study to address the challenges that we know we face within flexible packaging. So with that, I'd like to now pass it to Charles David, our moderator. Over to you, Charles David.
Thank you, Cher, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, it's great to see so many of you online today on my favorite subject, which is flexible plastic packaging. You might hear us talk about FPP throughout the conference. Obviously, FPP will be for flexible plastic packaging, so just making sure that this is clear right from the start. Also, we do have some great people around the table, great experts. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. You should see a Q&A button where you can add in your questions. So feel free to do so as we go along. We will make sure to keep a good 10, 15 minutes towards the end, which will be more in a panel where we can ask everybody the questions. So first, let's start with giving a little bit of context on why we all got together in PRFLEX and what flexible plastic packaging is in Canada. So research by the CPP showed that flexible plastic packaging now accounts for 47% of the plastic packaging that is put on the Canadian market, so about half of it. And I think the key point is that it's constantly growing. There's a 4.2% growth year to year that is planned for flexible packaging until 2030. So obviously everything that we're going to be talking about today is going to become even more and more important as years come along. I think a lot of you know the great advantages of flexible packaging, a lot of them sustainability-wise. It's very lightweight. It uses a lot less resources than some other types of packaging. It also extends shelf life with a lot of barrier action happening. Great to protect the product that it contains. It's been great for climate. It's got a great, carbon footprint. But its biggest challenge has always been towards end of life. Flexible plastic packaging is very complex, and that's something we'll talk about throughout the webinar. And obviously, what we're trying to solve with PRFLEX is those end of life challenges. For those of you who are maybe less aware of what's happening in Canada, there's also a lot of pressure happening both on the voluntary side and the regulatory side on regulatory aspects for FPP. So the first part is Environment and Climate Change Canada has came out recently with their framework for a recycled content and labeling legislation that might be coming up in the next few years. And the FPP is obviously very central to that, knowing kind of the issues that have been happening. You might also know that EPR is growing in Canada and is evolving in Canada, especially in the two most populated provinces of Quebec and Ontario. And with that comes very ambitious performance targets that are given by the local governments. So you can see here that by 2027 in Quebec, we're hoping to get a 40% recycling rate for flexible plastic packaging, and 25% by 2026. And those numbers get even higher as we move along to 2030. So very ambitious. On the other side, and you mentioned it, Chair, either through the Canada Plastics Pact, through the MacArthur Foundation, or through their CSR targets, a lot of brands, retailers, manufacturers came up with voluntary commitments related to flexible plastic packaging. So this all together kind of explains how PRFLEX got together. I think you presented the 7 members. Really, the first work that was done by PRFLEX is what we're going to discuss about today. There was really three main goals. Gathering baseline data. One thing we'll realize, and we'll talk about today a lot, is that there is a lack of reliable data around flexible plastic packaging in Canada right now. We also wanted to identify what were and are the infrastructure gaps in MRFs and also at reclaimers, and finally try to propose new technologies or processes to optimize and increase and improve, obviously, the recycling rates. So what we did is that we mandated Novaxia, and we're very happy that Sarah Emmanuel is with us today to discuss. And the work that we're going to discuss about was done between March and June of 2023. And we're very excited about giving you the first look at the results. So obviously the first part really was to start by looking at what's currently happening with FPP in Canada. So for those of you who are in the US, because I know we have a lot of US people joining us today, most curbside collection systems in Canada do accept some type of FPP. I think the estimate is around 70% of Canadians have access to a collection system of FPP in Canada. The vast majority of those only accept polyethylene PE-based films, so usually what would be plastic number 4. We do have a little bit of a different project happening in BC, and we'll be discussing with Sam about that, about FPPs and all types of FPPs being accepted in depots. And then on the other side, we also know and see that there is a very significant volume of plastic that is available in the ICI sector, so the institutional, industrial, and commercial sectors. That plastic is very clean. It's usually monomaterial. The main problem we saw is that there is not a widespread dedicated collection system at the ICI sector. Rather, that all of the waste is awful commingled together, and therefore the reclaimers cannot have access to that material. And then, so through that system that already exists, so we are estimating that around 46 to 59,000 tons per year of FPP is actually collected across the country. So this accounts to about 15 to 20% collection rate. Obviously, as I mentioned, the data, there's a bit of a lack of reliability in some of the data that we have right now, so we're still figuring that out. But we can say between 15 and 20% is actually collected, which is quite low compared to other materials. And then it's even lower when you consider the recycling rate, which means that 3 to 4% is actually recycled. So if you go back to the first slide where I mentioned that the goals in the next 3 years are to get to 25 or 40% of the recycling rate, you can see that we're very far from that. So the main, one of the main findings is that if we want to reach those targets, either voluntary or regulatory, we won't be able to do that by only accepting polyethylene films in the curbside recycling system anymore. We will have to open that to all types of FPP, which include multi-material structures, for example. So we will need to add those. If not, then the collection rate won't be high enough, the volumes won't be high enough, and then there won't be a way to higher the recycling rate. And that brings us to, well, what is currently being collected. So we see there's about 50,000 that is collected. So what is in there? Which type of product is that? So we know there is a very wide variety of FPP on the market, and that's kind of the strength of flexible plastic packaging, is that it is very varied and it's great for individual products. But that obviously adds a lot of complexity to the value chain. But once again, we were finding out that there was a lack of reliable data that was happening, that was existing on composition and volume of FPP. And this is why we did kind of our own waste audit. So 31 samples in Ontario and Quebec were chosen, both in the garbage and the recycling streams, to try to figure out what exactly is currently being put on the market for FPP. And that brings us to those lovely pie charts. Paul, I might ask you to come on because I'll for sure need you to comment on that from the CPP point of view. But really, what we're looking at here is that the majority of the FPP that's both in the garbage and the recycling stream is made of mono-PE. So it's made of polyethylene films. The good news about it is that, as I mentioned, recycling usually asks for LDPE only, and you can see that the average of that is higher on the recycling side than the garbage side. That means that while sometimes it can be a bit confusing for citizens, they are putting more PE in their recycling by proportion than they are putting it in the garbage. And that also is good news because those numbers are quite aligned with other work that was done, especially in Europe. We're thinking about either the CFLEX or the RAP projects. They usually have between 40 and 50% of PE-based films on the market in their numbers. The second one is where it gets really interesting, is that yellow, that light yellow, which is other FPP. So other FPP really includes all of the multi-material structures. That's a very wide category, a very wide family of flexible packaging. That includes, barriers such as, EVOH, PE, PET structures, metallized films, PVDC, nylon, so a lot of different types of structures. So you can see that amounts for about 30% And that's definitely the one that we're going to focus on in the next few days. And I see that question just came in. That's the green side, which is the non PPP flexible. Those are considered garbage bags or recycling bags. So you can see that um, they amount for a big percentage, obviously. So really, what we want to focus on is that mono PE and other FPP. Some interesting things that came out of that too. If you look at mono PET and mono PP, which are structures that are starting to grow, we see those with a lot higher numbers in Europe. We were very surprised to see how low they were in Canada in both the recycling stream and the garbage stream. So there's, again, obviously something else to look into in the future to try to figure out if that's actually the case or if it's our sample that was smaller. But definitely seems to be that there's less of those in Canada. So Paul, the first thing that we look, when we look at that rainbow of colors, I think the first thing we see is kind of that lack of harmonization that's happening throughout FPP. That's especially true in that other FPP section. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about what the CPP is doing on that and how you guys are trying to get towards that better harmonization in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I will maybe just start by recognizing that the Canada Plastics Pact is one of 15 pacts around the world aligned around the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's framework. And so there's this global alignment that's happening around design for recyclability for flexible packaging and films within the pacts, but also more broadly with brand owners and manufacturers internationally, and really understanding, what are those pathways to make that package more recyclable at the end of life without compromising on how the package performs in terms of, all the barrier layers and things we talked about. So how can you get to monomaterial in polyethylene or polypropylene? What are the innovations happening in that space? And so what the Canada Plastics Pact and our partners are focused on to try and get more of that harmonization and working in collaboration to move in that direction is around the adoption of the Golden Design Rules, and more specifically our Canadian guidance for the Golden Design Rules. Those are 9 sort of design rules that have been accepted and put forward by the Consumer Goods Forum that many of the producers, brand owners, and manufacturers are now aligned around, and specifically related to flexible plastics and packaging in that space. GDR number 2 is about removing problematic elements. GDR 3 is about eliminating excessive headspace. GDR 4 is about reducing plastic overwraps. And GDR 6 is really focusing on moving to that monomaterial PE, and in the Canadian guidance perspective, more mono PE than mono PP where possible. And lastly, I would say GDR 8 also looks at reducing virgin plastic use in business-to-business applications like stretch films, et cetera, where possible. So we at the CPP have developed a pathways to monomaterial guidance document that's available on our website that helps to look at where those pathways are and the trade-offs with different barrier layers and what innovation is happening in this space, so that they can be applied in different categories like food or non-food or cold storage. And we're also working with the Association for Plastic Recyclers out of the US and more broadly to really align our guidance around the Golden Design Rules with the APR guidance and clarifying any gray areas. The APR giving more technical guidance in some cases, and starting to work more closely with the US Plastics Pact with plans to host a workshop series for our signatories to tackle some of those challenges of moving to monomaterial and looking at the innovation space.
So what I'm understanding is we're trying to get that yellow towards that darker blue, right? So try to increase that darker blue portion and kind of reduce that yellow one where feasible, obviously, where we're technically feasible. So yeah, great resources that I invite you guys to. I think that they're on now in the chat, so I invite you guys to go read them. Thank you, Paul. So once we look at on the right side, so that's actually what's on the in the recycling stream and what's heading to MRF. So I see a lot of questions already on, wow, like I see all of this. So are you telling me that this is getting to MRFs? And that's where we're going, and kind of the next part of the value chain is that yes, MRFs are receiving all of that FPP and that mix of FPP. And I might invite you, Sarah, to come up with me, because you're the MRF expert among us. But really, I think what it showed through the results and through your discussions that you had is that it was pretty much unanimous among the MRFs in Canada that loose FPP is one of the most challenging and costly materials to sort in MRFs. And we have a few reasons on the side here. I think one of the reasons is what makes it great, which is the lightness of it. Also, is what makes it more difficult and challenging in the MRFs. It moves around. It overlaps with other types of materials, so it confuses a little bit the recognition equipment. It also tends to have the same density as other types of contaminants, and especially when you use aerolic systems, like air systems, it usually kind of can impact that. It also accumulates very easily on everything that's rotating, so it requires a lot of maintenance at the MRFs because they tend to block the equipment. A lot of them are for food products, so they do contain a lot of organic matter, and they tend to kind of increase the potential for contamination. Because it's light, again, it's very difficult to distribute evenly on a sorting belt. It tends to get moved around by heavier objects. It accumulates on tops of each other. And also, if you think about it, it's a lot of objects, so they are very light. So imagine to make a bale of FPP, which is around usually 750 kilos, you would have in that thousands and thousands of units. So if you can imagine, someone that's at the MRF on a conveyor belt trying to pick those, well, it's a lot more movements, whether it's done by a human being or by, like a robot. It's a lot more movements that have to happen to be able to produce that bale compared to one thing that would be bigger. Maybe, Sarah, one thing that we could look at, I saw already some questions on, single stream and dual stream and kind of all that stuff. So we did do kind of a graphic of what it looks like in a MRF to deal with FPP in both a single and a dual stream. So I don't know if you can help us kind of move through the single stream one first and try to explain how FPP is handled in a MRF.
Sure. And thank you for the good summary, Charles-David. Most common equipment that are designed for FPP capture and found in MRFs combine either mechanical, opticals, aerolic sorting. So we can think about air knives, zigzags, air ballistics, which separate FPP based on density, film grabbers, film extractors, film hoods, screens separate the FPP based on their mechanical properties. Also optics, robot, any vision technology equipment, which separate FPP based on either their signature or their attribute. And although those technologies are all very efficient and they've proven to be efficient in capturing FPP, it seems that FPP doesn't even get to these equipment once they're installed in a MRF, which is a great problem, and they're lost in the process. They get blended with other types of material, especially paper. And when they're found in their streams, FPP becomes a contaminant, and manual sorting is then inevitable. We can't avoid it. We have to provide resources to manually remove them. And that often happens at the quality control conveyors. And it becomes, as you mentioned, Charles-David, a very expensive, it's among the most expensive activities in a MRF these days. So on the left, we see a standard process in a single stream MRF that is in where the packaging and the fibers are collected together in the same bin, and they go together in a MRF. And there are two main schools of thoughts on optimizing FPP capture in single stream MRF. You have the early catch process, which aims at removing FPP from the start of the line instead of having it spread throughout the line. And you also have the catch-all process, where it's the opposite. We'll focus on the most valuable material, and we'll send all of the low value material to the end, where we will positively then separate the material that we want to put onto the market. So those are two schools of thought. Both models are, however, very hard to adapt in an existing MRF. Let's say the catch-all process strategy appears to be the best option in such a case, as was shown in the material recovery for the future project. But in that case, only if the space is available. But both models can be implemented in a greenfield MRF project, a new project. What you see on the right is the opposite. So we have FPP that's collected with package and fiber collected in another stream. This simplifies the process because we have a 2D material, the FPP, and a 3D material, the packaging. And it's very easy through mechanical equipment such as a ballistic to isolate the FPP and then provide the good technology to separate it. And it also reduces the pressure on the fiber sorting line because there's not that much FPP left in that stream, and it becomes less of a problem as it's being removed in either the QC station or throughout the QC equipment. So yeah, so that's those are the two different options that we found in MRFs.
Thank you, Sarah. So I think the conclusion from what I'm hearing from you, and that's one of the recommendations also of the report, is that the dual stream is better for sorting FPP just because it naturally, separates FPP notably from paper. But obviously we understand that, moving every single MRF and every collection system to a dual stream requires a lot of other changes and impacts a lot of other things. So that's why we mentioned that obviously this feasibility should be evaluated. For those of you who might not necessarily know the difference between single stream and dual stream, so really the single stream is the idea that every week you put all of your recyclables in the same bin. On the dual stream side, it could be done in different ways, whether you have 1 week where you would have usually your packaging, so that would be more of the rigid containers, and then on the other side you would have more of your fiber. That's going to be the week after. It can also be done in the same bin or different bins during the same weeks with different trucks, so it can be done different ways. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but I believe in Canada it's about 1/3 of people that have dual stream, and then 2/3 and the majority of Canadians are on a single stream. I believe
it's a little more than this, but you're
kind of close to that. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So that brings us to, well, what can we do, for MRFs to help them? And I would ask Sam to join for that, because obviously BC is a great model for that because you guys have a lot of very interesting processes. So really what we've tried to do and look at is, well, how can we make MRFs better to handle FPP from kind of what's the most preferred to, I guess, status quo. So if we look at what we've built, that ranking we built, well, if we start from the bottom, it would pretty much be status quo for most of Canada, which is really a single stream collection with loose FPP, which means that literally people are just taking their films and flexibles and they're just putting them in the bin every week, and then they just arrive to the MRF the same way you presented, Sarah, on the left side. One thing we can do to make that system a little bit better is try to find alternative FPP solutions in that same single stream. So that would be to remove that loose aspect of it. So is there ways that we could remove or reduce the amount of loose FPP that's coming to the MRF? That could be something like bags and bags, for example. So that would be asking people to put all of their films inside one bag. And therefore, it would be much easier for the MRFs to remove that one bag that would contain 25, 30, 20 other units rather than doing individual picks, for those 20 units. It also includes depots, and we'll make sure to talk about that with you, Sam, which would be a good way to actually isolate FPP before it actually comes into the MRF. And then you mentioned, Sarah, the next step would be to increase, if we can, the capacity in the existing single stream MRF to handle FPP better. That requires investment, obviously. It requires new equipment, but it requires space and maybe changes in the flow. You mentioned the two possible models, the early catch one and the catch-all. So obviously, that's something we can do in existing MRFs, but that requires having, the money and the space. And then if we don't, then the other option would be to do a greenfield. And I think a lot of people are looking through it to the EPR system right now, would be to build new MRFs, new single stream MRFs that have right away in the design been thinking about the growth of FPP and about how to handle them better. Maybe move to that early catch model that you mentioned, Simon, that was much trickier for existing single stream MRFs. So how can you design and work with the manufacturers of equipment and experts like you and Pierre that are on the call to try to build, that perfect MRF for that? And then obviously that brings us to kind of that ideal, most preferred scenario, which we just discussed, which is that dual stream collection. So really kind of a series of solutions that I think could help MRFs, from some easier ones to some heavier ones. And I think that's a great time to bring you in, Sam. So in BC, you guys have pretty much a mix of all of this. You guys have dual stream, you guys have single stream, and you guys have been trying out depots, for the past few years. So maybe if you can just kind of run through what's happening in BC, what worked, what didn't work, and kind of give us a few insights.
Absolutely. So in BC, we've been collecting plastic bags and overwrap, as we call it, since the program inception in 2014. And we've been collecting them segregated through our network of over 200 depots. And we do this due to the physical properties that we just talked about. In 2018, we launched the collection of other flexible plastic packaging, which is essentially all that multi-laminate material we've been referencing. And that was collected in depots alongside that original category that we've always collected. So once collected, this material is being used for research and development by our plastics end market, Merlin Plastics, to find a recycling solution for it. And in the meantime, it was being converted to an engineered fuel. In 2022, Merlin was able to find a recycling solution for this material. And in 2023, we were able to combine the plastic bags and overwrap category with that other flexible plastics packaging category to create one resident-facing collection category, flexible plastics. So this has made it much easier and more convenient for residents to recycle this. So in the depot, you'd be faced with one bin, and you no longer have to make that differentiation between your soft plastics. So this removed a lot of the confusion. So when we look at the performance, the depot network that we have has been able to capture just under 25% of the flexible plastics placed into the marketplace in BC for residential purposes. So that is, kind of
higher
unprecedented.
than the average, but
yeah, unprecedented across North America, but still a long way off from these aggressive targets that the pros have in place. So to figure out how to increase that convenience and increase that capture rate, we did a pilot in 2021 in West Vancouver to collect flexible plastics segregated at the curbside, so in its own bin. The pilot was a success because it showed the advantages of this convenience. And when we looked at the per household capture rate, it was over 3 times what we get through our depot network. So if you extrapolate that out, that would mean potentially we could capture 75% of what's placed in the market, which is huge. So moving forward, to continue to build our knowledge and our data, we've committed to curbside collection in 2 Metro Vancouver municipalities. In one, we've got curb and multifamily, so multi-resident buildings. And in the other, we're doing multifamily buildings. And those will roll out in mid to late 2024 and 2025. And then to date, we haven't committed to any trials where the material is commingled in with other streams, because this places significant risk on our commodity revenue and marketability. But we continue to pursue these types of solutions in conjunction with the PRFLEX partners, because the cost advantages would be significant if we could make it work properly.
And maybe you mentioned that, you went for, I guess, 25% to almost, I guess, 75% when you did those tests. So that means a lot more FPP coming in to Merlin in your case, so to your MRFs and to your reclaimers. So what's their perception of kind of having more of this product coming in through all of your trials? Do they have solutions for it? Are they trying to find it? Or is there pushback and stuff like that?
It's a good question. So, they've done very well to get be able to recycle the 25% that we do today. Their fear is that the more we bring in of this difficult to recycle material, they're kind of at their limits. So their ask is, on the other side, we need to make this material more homogeneous, more in line with golden design rules, so that as we increase on the collection side, we can be sure that we can continue to recycle all of that increased material that's captured.
And that brings us to, and thank you, Sam, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more. I see a lot more questions and discussions on all of this, and that brings us to kind of the last step of the value chain, which is the reclaimers and the end markets. And I think that's clear from what I'm hearing from you and what we're hearing from everyone, is that it all starts with the end market. So yes, we're putting a lot more of that material in, but are we going to be able to use it into new products? Maybe Pierre, if you can come up for that one. So obviously, we mentioned that we are asking a lot of the MRFs, especially if we start accepting all FPP. More FPP is going to add a lot of complexity for them, but it's also going to add a lot more complexity for the reclaimers, for the recyclers of flexible plastic packaging. So what the study showed is that currently, and I'll focus on that one, Pierre, and I'll let you chat about the future of what we see the future to be. But so currently, we believe that there's about 30,000 tons per year of FPP that is recycled in Canada. There's 3 big recyclers of FPP in Canada right now, and their focus is really on the PE polyethylene-based films, both LDP and LLDP, and that the vast majority of that PE is coming from ICI, so mostly from post-commercial sources. And that means that they don't really need to have a lot of sorting happening at their facilities. What they're getting is pretty much clean and homogeneous, and they do have something that's quite easier to deal with. They do have end markets for that. A lot of it is in durables. Some of it they manage to put back into flexibles, mostly in colored and unclear films. I think we all know that there's a lot of requests, and I think, Paul, you mentioned that earlier about putting PCR in shrink wrap and equivalents, which usually is clear and uncolored and transparent. So, Pierre, with what we're just discussed and what we're asking them to do, which is getting a lot more volume, first of all, and then a lot more variety, how do you see these players or new players kind of dealing with that in the future?
I think one key element we see from what we are asking the MRF is to produce a belt that is a mix of, flexible, so capturing the different flexible, but that would mean someone needs to do a more detailed sortation and feedstock preparation of it. So I think the report clearly assess that there are several end markets that could be reached, but would require that feedstock preparation, and a feedstock preparation that maybe only a reclaimer would be able to do. What we've heard is that it could take up to 1 year to develop just one post-consumer resin for one client for one product. So there is a lot of back and forth between the reclaimer and its clients to develop that specific recipe. So what we need to complete that gap would be facilities, reclaimer, that are capable of processing mixed flexible bale and segregate the content according to the actual and the future end market. So for instance, by separating the P film from the PP film from the multi-layer. So we need the reclaimer with that front end sorting system before going into the grinding, washing, and pelletizing, the usual recycling process.
Just to summarize, Pierre, so what I'm understanding is that we're asking the MRFs to capture as much FPP as they can, try to get everything that they have throughout their facility, put it in bales, but the sorting is actually going to happen not at the sorting center, but actually at the recyclers. Is that kind of a summary of what you just mentioned?
Yeah, I would say it's a good summary. The idea is to the reclaimer told Novaxia and the team during the project that they will work on the feedstock preparation anyway. So if a MRF is selling a PE film bell, they will have to do quality control to make sure that that will fit the demand. And what we have seen is that other end market could be reached with further processing, but that processing would require a lot of back and forth to develop a specific recipe. And a recipe is better being developed at a reclaiming facility than at a MRF, which receive a bunch of different materials.
And also, I'm guessing it's easier to equip 3, 4, 5 reclaimers rather than 70 plus MRFs, you know, also just on the, if we think about the system and overall and economically for all of us around the chain, it might make more sense too.
It is indeed.
One thing that I see in the questions and that we mentioned there is kind of the role of chemical recycling and how we see that chemical recycling could, again, play a role in the future, especially with those maybe harder to recycle multi-material FPP. So maybe if you can mention where we are now in Canada with that and then where we think it could be going in the next few years.
So chemical recycling would, you know, definitely play a role in this. But so far what we've seen is that the specification of the incoming feedstock they require would be would need to remove the usual contaminants we see in those type of bell, either, you know, PVC product or multi-layer with a PET layer components. So that would have, you know, that confirmed that there is a need for feedstock preparation anyway. The big advantage from the chemical recycling we see is the capacity to go to a food grade contact application, or even to go back to a transparency resin that is needed to reach several end markets as compared to a greenish color kind of pellets. So there are several initiatives in Canada and in the US so far on this, but none of them, at least in Canada, is at a sufficient scale to chemically recycle a mix of flexible plastic packaging.
Thank you, Pierre. And one thing we see is that, you know, the current state is 30,000 and we're hoping to that, we think it needs to go to 100,000. So almost more than triple in the next few years. So obviously, as we put more flexibles in the system, we need more capacity at the reclaimer level in Canada, both medical and chemical. So thank you, Pierre. I will move on to our last slide for now, but I see a ton of very good questions. So I want to make sure that we keep some time for that. So really kind of the summary slide, which is, you know, kind of, well, what comes out of this and what do we recommend, right? So the first thing you'll see is that when we try to build that perfect recycling system for FPP, it touches every single stakeholder along the value chain of plastic recycling. Whether we start with, you know, number one, which is what we discussed with Paul, which is better harmonization of FPP, obviously requires a lot of work from the brand, the retailers, and the manufacturers. Getting more ICI and getting a dedicated collection for that is also going to be key. The pros have a big role to play in the EPR system, and we can discuss about that, which is either through better use of data and how can they use their waste studies and the producers reporting to try to get a better idea of what's actually coming to the market and going through the system, but also to kind of widen the range of FPPs that are accepted in the stream and make MRFs responsible again for capturing FPP and not necessarily for separating them. And then we go to kind of all of those projects that we talked about with respect to collection and MRFs. So evaluate the feasibility of dual stream collection, evaluate the feasibility and cost of building new MRFs that are designed to better handle FPP. If those two are not possible, try to implement solutions like bags and depots. And as we just mentioned with Pierre, we need to develop new capacities for reclaimers, more volume, more separation. And clearly, we need to support the building of viable end markets for that entire system to be, first of all, viable, but also, you know, again, bring enough money and revenue for those recyclers and the entire system to be able to make those investments. So I'd bring kind of all you guys back and we can kind of move to more of a question panel period. I see a lot of things happening in there. I'd maybe start with just kind of a general question very quickly. When you look at this and kind of all of the recommendations, let me start with you, Paul. What's next? You know, so what's going to happen for either through PRFLEX or the CPP yourself? What are going to be your focus in the next few weeks and months?
Yeah, well, maybe really quickly, we're talking about putting together a steering committee of some sort or a governance body to drive these recommendations forward so that it's not just a report on the shelf, but it does continue to engage the stakeholders and the partners that are needed to actually, mobilize these recommendations. Where I think CPP plays a bigger role, as you mentioned earlier, is some of that upstream harmonization, bringing the brand owners and producers together with the manufacturers, and then the downstream participants around collection, sorting, recycling, to make sure that we're talking to each other and harmonizing the process and ensuring that where we're moving towards mono material and mono, maybe to able to manage these different formats in a way that gets the highest value out of those and can return clean streams, ideally back into new packaging. So that'll be our focus, but we'll also be looking at the IC&I sector in the coming months.
Sam, I think you touched on what's next. There's some very interesting questions I see through the chat on kind of giving a little bit more detail on the communities and how you're going to be doing those 2 pilots, and everything like that. So I don't know if you want to kind of give a little bit more detail on what's next for those few tests in BC.
Yeah, and I would just add, so I think there's 3 things that Recycle BC is focused on next in conjunction with partnerships here. To begin with, it's really promoting that compliance to GDR number 6, so that moving from multi-material to a mono PE or polypropylene. And as pros, the tool we have is through our EPR fee structure. Currently, there is no differentiation between that packaging that is in alignment with the GDRs and the packaging that is outside of alignment with the GDRs. So differentiating that and adding a differential in fee will be a financial incentive to drive producers towards the GDR compliant work. So that's a big tool that we have and something we need to work on. And then as far as collection, as I said, we're focused on implementing different collection programs to really gather that information and that feedback to help us then refine how we move forward. So how do we make it the most efficient to collect flexible packaging without the detrimental effects on other commodity grades, of the capabilities of our MRFs, of our commodity revenue, things of that nature. So that is really the second part of it. And then the third is really experimenting on the collection and the reclaimers, the processing and the reclaimer side of how do you capture these different forms of collected material. So some experimentation to do there.
Pierre, I know there's already things in the works for that bags and bag project potentially. I see a lot of comments on the bags and bags. Just to make it clear, it is a bags in bag in bin. Just making sure so that what we would ask is for people to put all of their film into one bag and then put it in their recycling bin the way they're currently doing it. Can you just tell us a bit about that and maybe other projects that you see that might be coming in the future on the reclaimer, the MRF, and the collection side?
Yeah, so on the bag and bag, I think we could acknowledge today that this is not a super innovation process. But if you go back to the slide showing what is most and least preferred scenario for sortation, there is a need to identify in the current MRF infrastructure, how do we accept film in curbside recycling without affecting the quality of the other commodities such as paper? And by having a bag and bag, we'll at least release some kind of pressure we can see on MRFs. Ideally, we would have facilities specifically designed to process film and flexible, but in the meantime, this is the general idea of is it something we could use, and what would be the parameters around that so it would be efficient? Could that be efficient would be the first question on those pilots. So yeah, that's the idea behind that bag-in-bag pilot, I would say. But again, acknowledging that this is not something new, and we know that. I guess one of the big next step would be on the reclaiming side. And as I have mentioned, we need for reclaimers that are capable of preparing and pre-sorting, I would say, the feedstock they will receive. If we have no reclaiming capacity, we can do a great sortation, but there is no point. We need to have a better capacity. We need to have reclaimers that are capable of processing more and more material. That is going to take a long period of time just to ramp up those type of capacity, because in the same time you are growing the capacity, you need to grow the demand. So that there will be a fair amount of work undertaken on this. And there is already a lot of discussion with several reclaimers to see how we can grow flexible plastic packaging recycling capacity.
Sarah, I see a few questions when I showed the results of that waste audit and the composition. So maybe a few questions to you on that. So a lot of people were asking a little bit more detail on the methodology, where the samples were taken, and also how the materials were identified, so how each different type of packaging were identified. So I don't know if you can give us a little bit more detail on that waste study.
Sure. The material was provided by MRFs and through waste sampling as well. It was a third party that performed the composition study, and they were using specified or specialized devices to identify the material. So it was done on it's a weight basis, but it was also using the specialized equipment for that.
And while I have you, a lot of questions also on dual stream and kind of the cost to retrofit to accept a dual stream. And I know that's, kind of the big question is, how big of a change would that be for a single stream system to go to a dual stream? So I know Pierre, Sam, Sarah, you all have experience in that. So can you maybe give us a few insights on how feasible this is and how costly this can be? And obviously we don't have the numbers, and that was not part of the study, but is that something that the pros are looking to right now?
I just want to be sure that I understand your question. You want to know how much it would cost to switch from a single stream to a dual stream?
Well, maybe not exactly how much, but what would the changes imply? So what would it imply at the MRF? What would it imply for collection? What would it imply for the consumer? Kind of maybe go through. And I think through that we could almost guess the costs, throughout, because obviously we do not have those numbers.
Yeah, so the impact starts with the collection and the citizen. So it does change the way collection is done. And Sam, you can probably add on to what I'm saying, but so it does change the habit for the communities that are working now on a single stream basis. But there are some equipment that exists, like trucks that can deal with dual streams and collect at once. It doesn't necessarily imply that it's collection that would be spread on 2 weeks, just to alternate between fiber and packaging collection. On the sorting side, it was interesting when we had the chance to visit one of the MRF in Canada that processes dual stream material, collected material. It was interesting to see that the equipments are basically the same. They might not be installed in the same way. The process might not be exactly a mirror from one to the other, but the equipment exists. It's not like chemical science. It remains very mechanical, and then we it just allows the material to flow better throughout the equipment.
Thank you. Maybe Sam, if you want to touch on the changes on the collection.
Yeah, I mean, each system has its benefits and its drawbacks. So as far as the resident is concerned, we don't see less participation in multi-stream collection. In fact, we see more in many cases. Then you get to the collection trucks and workers, and it is harder on the workers to collect in a dual or multi-stream system than it is on a single stream, because they just have the arm that goes into the truck. So getting the labor for dual stream collection is more difficult. But then once you get into the post-collection side, the sorting side, you get much better quality materials all around. So you get better access to fiber markets, better access to plastic markets. You have a whole host of benefits from going into a multi or a dual stream system. And I'll just say here in BC, we have, I call it a multi-stream because we have the mixed paper, the mixed containers, and often case we have a glass container separately because we don't accept glass commingled. And that adds a lot of benefit to the quality of our materials as well. And so those those programs that we're going to implement will essentially be a 4-stream system now. So, you know, at the moment, it involves sending a second truck around to each house, but that's something that we can work on. How do you collect in a 4-stream truck, for example?
Thank you both. And maybe one last quick question. I think Pierre, that one might be for you, knowing that this was some work that was done by the Circular Plastics Taskforce in the past. There's a few questions about the digital watermarking or digital labeling, and how it could get included into this process. And is that, you know, some way that could be used, but also is there other types of technologies like AI or NIR that could be used, you know, throughout the system to better sort? So maybe kind of just your very quick, you know, 1-2 minute response on those types of sorting technologies.
Okay, so first of all, if we acknowledge the fact that the reclaimer will do most of this, I would say, granular sortation, those type of technology would be better suited in the at a reclaiming facility. We see a lot of advantages from the digital watermarking or AI, specifically when it comes to remove or sort out some of the material that would be considered problematic for the recycling. So again, a pouch with a PVC layer in it. If we are able to know through a digital watermark that this product contains PVDC, and that is something that neither mechanical recycler nor chemical recycler wants, then we can remove it. That would be a huge advantage. The other way that digital watermark, or digital watermark specifically, could play a key role is when it comes to recycled content. So if a reclaimer is knowing exactly what is the composition of the different attributes that come on the line, then it will be easier for them to prepare some kind of a recipe that would be suitable for PCR content in the different packaging. So yes, definitely a key role from those technology. And when we say that it's going to take a long time to ramp up the recycling capacity, that would include advanced sorting and recycling technologies like that.
Perfect, and great timing. So first of all, thank you everyone for the questions. There were a lot of questions in the Q&A. I tried to bring as many as I could. A lot of them might and will be answered in some of the follow-up documents that we might be sending you. So Cher, I'm leaving you to conclude and explain the next steps to our participants.
Thank you. It is very clear to me from our discussion today that we all need to work together to bring these recommendations forward, particularly around design, use of monomaterials, and alignment with the golden design rules. It's also clear that this issue is very complex and it is not going to be solved quickly. Realistically, we're looking at a 5 to 10 year horizon of continuous effort and collaboration. But the PRFLEX partners are committed to addressing these recommendations and would really like to ask all of you to join us in that effort. So if you have any questions, any ideas, you want to participate in Next Step, feel free to reach out to any of the PRFLEX members or write us at info@plasticspact.ca. A big thank you to our experts for sharing these important insights, to all of the participants for tuning in and asking such great questions. And finally, as we close out, you will receive a copy of the slide deck, a recording of the webinar, a white paper that summarizes everything that you heard today, as well as a link to the detailed technical report. And while the white paper is a great summary, I do encourage you to have a look and dig deep into the technical paper. It is just a wealth of information. It includes data on the current state in Canada, investment estimates, and some examples of Europe's best practices. So stay tuned for all of that early next week. Thank you again for joining us. Take care.